"I'm sorry, but this check seems suspicious," the teller said, holding it like it might burn her fingers. James Carter, dressed in a plain blazer and holding nothing but a business card, and a check for $25,000, said nothing at first. He let the silence stretch, the weight of her doubt settle around them. No one in the lobby knew he was the CEO of one of California's top investment firms. No one recognized the man who built a 200-year empire from nothing. They just saw a black man and made a decision. But what they didn't see was the camera in his pocket, or the storm he was about to unleash, because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system doing exactly what it was built to do. And today that system was about to answer for it. If you believe respect should come before prejudice, drop a respect first in the comments and hit subscribe now. You won't believe what happens next, because today's story isn't just about being denied. It's about a lesson and a reckoning that shook an entire institution. Hi everyone, welcome to BW Stories. Let's get started. James Carter stepped into the cool, sterile air of Pinnacle Trust Bank in downtown Los Angeles. The morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows, casting sharp rays across the polished marble floor. His footsteps echoed with determination, each one a reminder of the empire he had built from scratch. In his hand was a sleek leather briefcase containing a check for $25,000 from Zenith Ventures, his investment firm. This was a familiar transaction, one he had done countless times. But today was not an ordinary day. Today, James was not the CEO. He was just a man in a navy blazer with no tie, flashy watch or entourage. Just a customer, or so they would think. Pinnacle Trust was one of Zenith Ventures' largest banking partners, handling millions of transactions yearly. James had risen from a tiny office in South Central to a luxurious suite in Century City, building a company that stood toe-to-toe with California's top firms. But whispers had reached him, stories of black customers being treated like second-class citizens at Pinnacle Trust. As a black man who had faced countless closed doors and suspicious glances, James knew those whispers weren't just rumors. They were a call to action. Today he would see for himself if the bank, his company entrusted with millions, was betraying the values he held dear. The bank lobby buzzed with the quiet hum of wealth. Tellers in crisp suits moved efficiently. Customers stood in neat lines, and the soft chime of service bells rang at regular intervals. James scanned the room, his sharp eyes catching a white man in a tailored gray suit at a nearby counter. The teller, a young woman, Sarah Brooks, flashed a warm smile as she counted out $30,000 in cash, handing it over without a single question. The man pocketed the money, gave a curt nod, and strode out, his confidence untouched by scrutiny. James's jaw tightened, a familiar heat curling in his chest. He had seen this dance before too many times, the ease, the trust, the unspoken privilege that came with a particular skin color. He forced his expression to remain neutral, but a storm was brewing. If Pinnacle Trust were playing that game, they would soon learn how costly their mistake would be. He approached Sarah's counter, sliding the check and a stack of bills through the slot. His voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of authority. "Good morning, I'd like to deposit this." Sarah glanced at the check, then at James. Her eyes lingered, narrowing slightly, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. "This line is for business clients only," she said curtly, pointing to a longer line across the lobby. James held her gaze, his smile unwavering. "I'm in the right place. This is a business account deposit." Her lips pressed into a thin line and she leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "I'll need to see some identification." The words were sharp, laced with an unspoken accusation. James paused, not because he doubted himself, but because he recognized that tone. It was the same one he had heard in boardrooms at car dealerships, in every space where his presence was questioned before speaking. He pulled his wallet from his pocket, slid his driver's license through the slot, and watched her closely. Sarah picked up the license, flipping it over as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. Her eyes flicked between the photo and James' face, her expression hardening. "Is this your ID?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. James raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning, but his voice still steady. "Yes." Why she didn't answer. Instead, she set the license aside and lifted the check, holding it to the light, like a detective examining evidence. "Where'd you get this?" The question hit like a slap. James felt the fire in his chest flare, but he kept composure. "I wrote it," he said firmly. "It's from my company, Zenith Ventures." Sarah let out a soft scoff, barely audible but sharp enough to cut. "And what exactly do you do at this company?" "I'm the CEO," James replied, his voice clear and deliberate, each word challenging. Her smirk was subtle but unmistakable, a curl of the lips that said she'd already made up her mind. She leaned forward, pressing a button on her console. A crackle came through the intercom and her voice was cold. Professional, security. I need assistance at counter 3. James's hand tightened on the handle of his briefcase, his knuckles whitening. Is there a problem? He asked, his voice low controlled, but carrying a warning. Sarah folded her arms, her eyes narrowing. I'm just doing my job. This check doesn't look right and your story doesn't add up. The air in the bank shifted, growing heavier, as if the room sensed the storm brewing. A tall security guard, Ethan Hayes, emerged from a side door, his broad frame filling the space. His eyes scanned the scene, locking onto James with a practiced neutrality that didn't hide the tension in his stance. Customers nearby turned, their curiosity thinly veiled. A middle-aged white woman in a pearl necklace clutched her purse tighter, her gaze flickering between James and Sarah. A young man in a cheap suit whispered to his friend, their laughter stifled but audible. Is there an issue, Sarah? Ethan asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Sarah gestured toward James, her tone sharp. I suspect fraud. This guy handed me a check and an ID that don't match his story. James turned to Ethan, his expression unyielding. There's no fraud. I'm here to deposit a check from my company account. Everything I've provided is legitimate. Ethan's eyes flicked between Sarah and James, his posture rigid. Do you want me to call the police? Sarah waved a hand, her voice smug. Not yet. Let's verify the check first. It's from some company called Zenith Ventures, and he claims he's the CEO. James inhaled deeply, the sting of her words sinking into him like a blade. He'd built Zenith Ventures from a dream into a powerhouse, and now this woman was reducing it to some company, dismissing him as if he were a con artist in a cheap suit. You could save us all some time by calling the number on the check, he said, his voice steady but laced with steel. They'll confirm everything. Sarah ignored him, pulling a second monitor closer and slowly typing. She glanced at him again, her voice dripping with condescension. Do you even have another form of ID? A business card, maybe? Something that proves who you say you are. James opened his briefcase and retrieved a sleek business card embossed with the Zenith Ventures logo and his name, James Carter, CEO. He slid it through the slot, his eyes never leaving hers. Sarah picked it up, gave it a cursory glance, and tossed it aside like junk mail. You know, we have policies to stop people from scamming us, she said, her tone biting. You'd be surprised how many try to pass off fake checks. Should have thought this through better. James' jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Is this how you treat all your customers, or just the ones who look like me? The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Sarah froze briefly, her eyes flickering with uncertainty before hardening again. I'm just doing my job, she snapped. You're the one acting suspicious. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice cautious. Let's verify the check and sort this out. James nodded, stepping back, but his gaze stayed locked on Sarah. The anger simmering inside him was no longer just about this moment. It was about every time he'd been questioned, doubted, dismissed, every time he'd had to prove he belonged in rooms where others walked in without a second thought. Sarah picked up the phone, her movements brisk, her voice clipped as she dialed. This is Sarah from Pinnacle Trust. I'm calling to verify a $25,000 check from Zenith Ventures. Can I speak to someone in charge? James stood silent, his face a mask of calm, but his heart pounded with fury and anticipation. He knew what was coming. Sarah's smugness would crumble, and the truth would hit her like a freight train. But it wouldn't erase the sting of this moment, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in a place where he should have been respected. As Sarah waited, her nails tapped impatiently on the counter, her posture radiating irritation. Customers nearby pretended not to listen, but their eyes betrayed them. Curious, judgmental. Eager for drama, the older woman with the pearls shifted uncomfortably. Her lips pursed. The young man in the suit smirked, whispering something to his friend. James felt their stares like pinpricks, each a reminder of the world he navigated daily. The line connected, and Sarah's tone sharpened. Yes, I have someone here claiming to be. James Carter says he's your CEO. He's trying to deposit a check, and I need to confirm it's legit. A pause. James watched her closely, catching the moment. Her expression faltered. Her eyes widened, her smug grin vanishing as if someone had flipped a switch. Her face drained of color, her hand trembling as it gripped the phone. Yes, I understand, she stammered. No, I didn't know. Thank you. She hung up, her gaze dropping to the counter, unable to meet James' eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. The check. It's verified. James tilted his head, his voice cold as ice. So what now? You going to process my deposit, or do I need to jump through more hoops? Sarah fumbled with the keyboard, her fingers shaking. I need to enter the details. Before she could finish, a man in a gray suit emerged from a back office, his stride brisk. His nameplate read Robert Evans, branch manager. He glanced at the scene, Sarah's pale face, Ethan's tense stance, the curious onlookers, and his brow furrowed. What's going on here? He demanded, his tone sharp but controlled. Sarah straightened her voice unsteady. I verified a suspicious transaction, but it's sorted now. James stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Sorted. She accused me of fraud, questioned my identity without cause, and treated me like a criminal based on nothing but her assumptions. Robert's eyes flicked to Sarah and James, sizing them up. I'm sorry for any inconvenience, sir. Carter, James interrupted, his tone unyielding. James Carter, CEO of Zenith Ventures. The room seemed to freeze. Sarah's hands froze on the keyboard, her breath catching. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. The onlookers fell silent, their whispers dying in their throats. Robert's face tightened, but he forced a smile. His voice strained. Mr. Carter, I apologize for the misunderstanding. We'll process your transaction immediately. James didn't move, his gaze locked on Robert. Misunderstanding? Is that what you call this? Your employee just humiliated me in front of your entire bank, and you think a receipt fixes that? Robert's smile wavered, but he held his ground. I assure you we'll handle this internally. Sarah will be reprimanded. James's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Reprimanded. She accused me of fraud because of the color of my skin. That's not a reprimand situation. That's a lawsuit. Sarah's face crumpled, tears spilling over. I didn't mean to. I was just following protocol. James turned to her, his voice sharp. Protocol. You didn't follow protocol with the white guy who just walked out with $30,000. You made a choice, Sarah. And it was the wrong one. Robert stepped between them, his hands raised. Let's not make this worse. We'll sort it out. Let's process your deposit. And James cut him off, his voice rising. You think this is just about the deposit? This is about respect, about dignity, about every black customer who walks through that door and gets treated like a thief. The lobby fell silent. The weight of his words hanging in the air. Customers stared, some nodding in agreement, others looking away. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his radio. Robert's face was a mask of forced calm, but his eyes betrayed panic. I understand your frustration, Robert said, his voice tight, but let's not blow this out of proportion. We can resolve this privately. James let out a short, bitter laugh. Privately, so you can sweep it under the rug. No, this happens in the open where everyone can see. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and hit record. I'm documenting this because I want the world to know how Pinnacle Trust treats its customers. Sarah's eyes widened, her voice trembling. You can't do that. I can, James snapped. And I will. Robert's face paled, but he tried to maintain control. Mr. Carter, please take this to my office. James didn't budge. No, this happens here. Process the deposit. Now Sarah's hands shook as she typed, her eyes glued to the screen. Robert stood by, his jaw clenched. The deposit was completed silently, and the receipt was printed with a soft whir. Sarah slid it through the slot, her voice barely audible. It's done. James took the receipt, his eyes locked on hers. You should have checked the facts before you decided who I was. He turned to Robert, his voice cold. I want to speak to your regional director. Now Robert's face tightened, but he shook his head. That's not necessary. We can handle this internally. James' voice rang out, sharp enough to make the room flinch. Not necessary. You think this is just about me? Get your director on the phone, or I'll make sure this goes viral by noon. Robert's eyes widened, but he held his ground. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. You need to leave. James laughed again, the sound short and bitter. Wave. You're throwing me out of the bank where my company parks millions. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. Sir, you need to go now. James didn't move. His phone was still recording. You're making a mistake. A big one. Robert nodded to Ethan, his voice low. Escort him out. Ethan grabbed James's arm, his grip tight, and yanked him toward the door. James stumbled, but caught himself, his briefcase swinging wildly. The crowd gasped, some stepping back, others pulling out their phones to record. The woman with the pearls whispered, "This is outrageous." The young man in the suit laughed, his phone trained on the scene. James wrenched his arm free, his voice booming. "Get your hands off me!" Ethan grabbed him again harder this time and shoved him toward the glass. Glass doors, James's shoulder slammed into the frame, pain shooting through his arm. The door swung open and he was pushed outside the morning air, hitting him like a slap. His briefcase hit the pavement, papers scattering. Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face impassive. James straightened his chest, heaving his phone still in hand. The crowd inside watched through the glass. Their faces a mix of shock, curiosity, and indifference. Sarah stood behind the counter, her eyes wide with fear. Robert turned away, retreating to his office. But James wasn't done, not by a long shot. James knelt to gather his scattered papers, his hands shaking with rage. The humiliation burned a raw, visceral pain, cut deeper than any physical blow. He'd faced prejudice before countless times, but this was different. This was the bank where his company entrusted millions. His name and wealth should have meant something, and they'd treated him like trash. He stood brushing off his blazer and pulled out his phone again. His fingers moved quickly, uploading the video to X with a caption, "Pinnacle Trust Bank thinks black customers are criminals. This is how they treat the CEO of one of their biggest clients, net banking, while black." He hit post, and within minutes the notifications flooded in. Shares, comments, outrage. People tagged news outlets, civil rights groups, and influencers. The post spread like wildfire, each retweet a spark in a growing inferno. James dialed a number, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Elena, it's me. I need you at Pinnacle Trust in LA. Now, Elena Rivera, his chief operating officer and trusted ally, didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." "What happened?" "They threw me out," James said, his voice tight. "Accused me of fraud, humiliated me in front of everyone. The video's on X, bring legal." Elena's voice hardened. 15 minutes. "Stay put." James ended the call, his eyes fixed on the bank's gleaming facade. Through the glass, he saw Sarah whispering to another teller, her face pale. Robert was on the phone, pacing in his office. Ethan stood guard at the door, his posture rigid. A second security guard, Marcus Tate, a black man, approached James cautiously. His eyes were weary, carrying the weight of too many years in a system that didn't value him. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice low. James nodded, but his expression was grim. "Not really." "You see what happened in there?" Marcus sighed, glancing back at the bank. "Yeah, happens too often. They don't say it out loud, but don't trust us." "Never have." James met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "This time, they picked the wrong guy." Marcus gave a slight nod, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hope you burn it down." James didn't respond, but the words sank in, fueling his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Marcus, for every black customer who'd been doubted, dismissed, dehumanized. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Elena Rivera stepped out, her presence commanding. A Latina. In her early 40s, she wore a tailored suit and an expression that could cut glass. Behind her was David Langston, Zenith Ventures' lead counsel, a white man renowned for dismantling opponents in court. They moved toward James, their strides purposeful. Elena's eyes scanned him, taking in the disheveled blazer and the scattered papers. "You hurt?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. James shook his head. "Not physically, but they're about to be." David adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but lethal. "We've got the video. It's damning. What do you want to do?" James's eyes burned with determination. "Everything lawsuit media, the works. They don't get to walk away from this." Elena nodded, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling CNN, Bloomberg, and the LA Times. This goes national by tonight." David opened his briefcase, pulling out a tablet. "I'll draft a complaint for racial discrimination. We're looking at punitive damages, maybe $10 million, and we'll demand a full audit of their practices." James gave a curt nod, his voice low. "Do it and make it hurt." They turned toward the bank, the glass doors reflecting their resolve. Ethan stiffened as they approached, his hand moving to his radio. "You can't come back in." Elena cut him off, her voice sharp. "Step aside or you'll be named in the lawsuit." Ethan hesitated, then stepped back, his face pale. The door swung open and James led the way, his presence a storm cloud rolling through the lobby. Customers parted, their whispers growing louder. Sarah froze behind the counter, her eyes wide with panic. Robert emerged from his office, his face a mask of forced calm. "Mr. Carter?" he said, his voice strained. "I thought we resolved this?" James stopped his gaze, locking onto Robert's, resolved. "You threw me out of the bank where my company parks millions. You let your employee accuse me of fraud because of my skin color. You think a receipt fixes that?" Robert's mouth opened, then closed. Sarah's hands trembled as she backed away from the counter. Elena stepped forward, her voice cold. "I'm Elena Rivera, COO of Zenith Ventures. This is David Langston, our counsel. You have 5 minutes to get your regional director on the phone, or we start filing." Robert's face paled, but he tried to hold his ground. "I don't have the authority to." "Then find someone who does." David snapped his tone, leaving no room for argument, because by tomorrow, Pinnacle Trust will be answering to a federal judge. The lobby was silent, the weight of their words sinking in. Customers stared, some filming, others whispering. The woman with the pearls slipped out the door, her face flushed. The young man in the suit lowered his phone, his smirk gone. Robert fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. I'll call them." James crossed his arms, his voice a low growl. "You do that and tell them." James Carter's waiting. The next hour was a blur of chaos and consequences. Robert's call to the regional director, Patricia Coleman, was met with stunned silence, followed by a promise to be at the branch within the hour. James, Elena, and David waited in the lobby, their presence a constant reminder of the storm they'd unleashed. The video on X had exploded with thousands of shares and comments pouring in. Hashtags like #BankingWhileBlack and #PinnacleTrust. Racism trended nationwide. News vans began to arrive outside, reporters setting up cameras and microphones. Sarah was a wreck, her eyes red from crying as she packed her belongings. Robert paced in his office, his phone buzzing incessantly. Ethan stood by the door, his face a mask of regret. Marcus, the black security guard, lingered near the edge of the lobby, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. Patricia Coleman arrived in a flurry, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. A white woman in her 50s, she carried herself with the polished arrogance of someone used to being in control. But her composure faltered when she saw James, Elena, and David waiting for her. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice smooth but strained. "I'm deeply sorry for what happened. This was a terrible misunderstanding." James didn't blink. "Misunderstanding? Your employee accused me of fraud, your manager threw me out, and your security put their hands on me. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racism." Patricia's smile was tight, her eyes darting to the cameras outside. "I assure you, Pinnacle Trust does not tolerate discrimination. We'll investigate thoroughly and investigate," Elena cut in her voice sharp. "The evidence is on X for the world to see. You don't need an investigation, you need accountability." David stepped forward, his tablet in hand. "We're filing a lawsuit for racial discrimination, defamation, and assault. We seek $10 million in damages and request a federal audit of your banking practices. You can cooperate, or you can fight us in court. Your choice." Patricia's face hardened, but she nodded. "I understand. We'll take immediate action. Sarah has been terminated, and we'll review Robert's role." James shook his head, his voice cold. "That's not enough. This isn't about one employee or one manager. It's about a culture that lets this happen. You've got black customers walking out of here every day feeling like criminals. You think firing one person fixes that?" Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't respond. The cameras outside flashed the reporters shouting questions through the glass. The crowd in the lobby grew, some customers leaving, others staying to watch Marcus step closer, his voice low. "You're doing what I never could," he said to James. "Make 'em feel it." James gave a slight nod, his resolve unshaken. "They will." Patricia turned to Robert, her voice sharp. "You're suspended, effective immediately." "Clear your office." Robert's face crumpled, but he didn't argue, still clutching her belongings. Sarah burst into tears as she exited. The lobby was a battlefield, the air thick with tension and the weight of what had just unfolded. James turned to Elena and David, his voice low. "Get the press conference ready. We're not stopping here." By evening, Pinnacle Trust was a national headline. James's video had millions of views, sparking nationwide protests outside the bank's branches. Black customers shared their own stories of discrimination, flooding social media with accounts of being questioned, delayed, or outright refused service. Pinnacle Trust stock plummeted 15% after hours trading, and major clients began pulling their accounts. The hashtag boycott Pinnacle Trust trended alongside calls for a federal investigation. James held a press conference outside the bank flanked by Elena David and a team of civil rights attorneys. Cameras flashed as he stepped to the podium, his voice steady but fierce. Today I was treated like a criminal in a bank where my company parks millions of dollars. But this isn't just about me. It's about every black person who's been doubted, dismissed, or dehumanized because of their skin. Pinnacle Trust failed me, but worse, they've failed countless others. We're suing for $10 million, but no amount of money can erase the damage done. This is a call for change, not just at Pinnacle Trust, but in every institution that profits off our labor while disrespecting our dignity. The crowd applauded and signs waved with slogans like "End Banking," "Racism and Justice for James." The press conference aired live on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, dominating the news cycle. Pinnacle Trust issued a statement promising immediate reforms, but the public's outrage drowned it out. Over the next week, the fallout intensified. James's lawsuit was filed naming Pinnacle Trust, Sarah Brooks, Robert Evans, and Ethan Hayes as defendants. The complaint detailed the incident and a pattern of discriminatory practices backed by statements from former employees and customers. Marcus Tate, the security guard, came forward with his account, revealing how he'd been passed over for promotions despite years of service. Pinnacle Trust Board of Directors scrambled to contain the damage, firing Patricia Coleman and announcing a $5 million fund for diversity training. But it was too little too late. Black-owned businesses withdrew their accounts en masse, and a class action lawsuit emerged representing dozens of customers with similar experiences. The bank's reputation was in tatters, its future uncertain. James didn't stop there. He launched the Carter Justice Foundation, the nonprofit dedicated to supporting victims of racial discrimination in the financial industry. The foundation offered legal aid, financial literacy programs, and advocacy for systemic change. At its inaugural event, James stood before a packed auditorium, his voice resonant with purpose. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," he said. "It's about changing how we see and treat each other. It's about building a world where no one can prove they belong. I'm not here to tear down Pinnacle Trust. I'm here to build something better for me, you, and all of us." The crowd rose to their feet, their applause shaking the room. Marcus Tate was in the audience now, a program coordinator for the foundation. Although unemployed and disgraced, Sarah Brooks watched the event on TV. Her regret, a bitter pill she'd swallow for years. Robert Evans, demoted to a low-level position at another bank, avoided the news altogether. Under new leadership, Pinnacle Trust implemented sweeping reforms, but the scars of that day remained. James returned to Zenith Ventures, his resolve stronger than ever. He kept the receipt from that deposit in his office, a reminder of the fight he'd won and the battles still to come. Outside, the neon glow of Los Angeles pulsed a city of dreams and shadows. Beneath it, James Carter stood tall, a man who'd turned pain into power, humiliation into hope. But the story didn't end there. James's lawsuit against Pinnacle Trust became a media spectacle, drawing attention worldwide. The trial date was set and the courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. James sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Elena and David, his face a steel wall. Pinnacle Trust's legal team, led by a seasoned attorney named Charles Hargrove, walked in with the confidence of those accustomed to winning. The trial began with Sarah Brooks' testimony. She stood on the witness stand, her voice trembling, her eyes red. "I didn't mean to discriminate," she said, choking back tears. "I was just following my training, checking suspicious transactions. I didn't know who he was." David stood, his voice sharp as a blade. "Did you ask for ID from the white customer before him? The one who took $30,000 in cash?" Sarah bowed her head, whispering. "No, so what made Mr. Carter's transaction suspicious?" David pressed. Sarah didn't answer, tears streaming down her face. The judge, a black woman named Judith Monroe, looked at her sternly but said nothing. Next was Robert Evans. He tried to maintain his composure, but his trembling voice betrayed his fear. "I was trying to de-escalate," he said. "I didn't know he was the CEO of Zenith Ventures. If I had, I would have handled it differently." Elena stood, her voice cold. "You don't need to know who he is to treat him like a human being. You chose to throw him out instead of fixing the mistake." Why, Robert stammered. "It was a split-second decision. I didn't think it was racist, but the evidence said otherwise." The video James recorded played in the courtroom. The audio crisped through the speakers. Sarah's suspicious tone, Robert's order to remove him the thud as Ethan shoved him through the door. The crowd in the courtroom murmured some shaking their heads. Judge Monroe took notes, her face impassive. Pinnacle Trust brought in their witnesses, a banking policy expert who argued that Sarah's actions were within anti-fraud guidelines. But David quickly countered, presenting internal data from the bank over the past year. 78% of customers who asked for additional verification were Black, despite making up only 20% of the clientele. The courtroom buzzed with tension, and Charles Hargrove struggled to regain control. The trial's climax came when James took the stand. He wore a black suit, his voice steady but robust as thunder. "I didn't go to Pinnacle Trust to cause trouble," he said. "I went to deposit money. I earned through years of hard work, breaking through doors, slammed shut because of my skin. But instead of being treated like a customer, I was treated like a criminal. Not because of the check or my ID, but because of who I am. I built a company worth hundreds of millions, but to them I was just a fraud until proven otherwise." He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom, lingering on the jury, a diverse group of 8 men and 4 women, some nodding slightly. "This isn't just about me," he continued. "It's about every Black person who faces suspicion daily at bank stores and on the streets. I'm suing not for the money, I'm suing for change. Because if we don't hold them accountable, they'll keep doing this to others." The courtroom was silent, his words sinking in. Charles Hargrove attempted to cross-examine, questioning why James didn't reveal his identity sooner. "You deliberately hid who you were to trap them, didn't you?" Hargrove asked, his tone mocking. James looked him dead in the eye, unflinching. "I don't need to shout. I'm the CEO to be respected. I gave them my ID. I gave them my business card. They chose not to believe me. That's not a trap. That's the truth." They exposed themselves. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The jury foreman, an older Black man, stood, his voice echoing. "We find Pinnacle Trust guilty of racial discrimination and defamation. We award the plaintiff, James Carter, $12 million in damages." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting in protest. James sat still, his face unchanged, but his eyes gleamed victoriously. Pinnacle Trust had been dealt a heavy blow, not just financially but in reputation, now irreparably damaged. In the wake of the trial, Pinnacle Trust spiraled into crisis. Protests spread, with hundreds gathering outside their New York headquarters, waving banners demanding justice. A coalition of Black-owned businesses led by Zenith Ventures launched a nationwide boycott, leading to thousands of accounts being closed within weeks. The bank's stock plummeted another 20%, and the board of directors was forced to resign en masse. But the storm didn't stop there. A former Pinnacle Trust employee, Lisa Monroe, came forward with a trove of internal documents, emails, memos, reports, proving the bank had deliberately targeted Black customers for extra scrutiny as a precautionary measure. The scandal broke, triggering a federal investigation by the Department of Justice. Headlines screamed, "Pinnacle Trust, the Bank of Racism." James seized the momentum to expand the Carter Justice Foundation. He partnered with lawmakers to push for new legislation. The Financial Equality Act aimed at imposing heavy penalties on financial institutions that discriminated based on race. In a congressional hearing, he stood before senators, his voice strong. "We can't let places like Pinnacle Trust continue to operate unchecked," he said. "This isn't just about me or a few people. It's about a system that's destroyed lives for decades. It's time to fix it." Meanwhile, Sarah Brooks faced personal consequences. After being fired, she was shunned by her community, unable to find work in banking. She tearfully apologized in a rare local TV interview, but the public was unmoved. Now working at a small suburban bank, Robert Evans lived in obscurity, avoiding the spotlight. Ethan Hayes left security work, taking a job at a warehouse. His past at Pinnacle Trust, a ghost that haunted him. But not everyone backed down. Charles Hargrove, Pinnacle Trust's lawyer, quietly plotted revenge. He contacted a group of wealthy investors, convincing them to fund a smear campaign against James, accusing him of exploiting the lawsuit for personal gain. Rumors spread on social media, with anonymous accounts labeling James a money grabber and troublemaker. One morning, James woke to find Zenith Ventures' office vandalized, the words "liar" spray painted across the glass. James didn't flinch. He called his team together, his voice calm but firm. "They think they can silence me," he told Elena and David. "But I've faced worse than this. We'll fight back, not with fists, but with truth." Zenith Ventures hired private investigators to trace the smear campaign. Within a month, they uncovered the link to Hargrove and his investors. James went public with the evidence at another press conference, standing before a growing crowd of supporters. They couldn't beat me in court, so now they're playing dirty, he said, holding the documents. But I'm not here to play games. I'm here to win. For all of us, the public rallied behind him once more. Hargrove's investors pulled out, leaving him to face the backlash alone. He eventually quit, leaving the legal field in disgrace and his career in ruins. Months later, James walked into a community center in South Central, where the Carter Justice Foundation was hosting a financial literacy workshop. The room was packed with young Black entrepreneurs, their faces bright with ambition. Marcus Tate greeted him at the door, his smile genuine. "You changed things, man," he said. "Not just for you, but for all of us." James shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "We changed things, and we're just getting started." As he stepped to the front of the room, the crowd quieted their eyes on him. He looked at them, seeing faces and futures he'd fight to protect. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his journey. "You belong everywhere, and if they try to push you out, push back, not with anger, but with truth. That's how we win." The room erupted in applause, a chorus of hope rising beneath the neon glow. Outside, the city hummed its lights, a beacon in the night. And James Carter, a man who'd faced the worst and built something better, knew. The fight was far from over, but he was ready.
I love this story. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more information. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.